Going insane here, like I cannot handle this. Just trying to do everything we can to stay in this and
just don't need to be dealing with this right now.
I just can't keep dealing with the pain on the trail and not sleeping and
So close.
I just can't move. What is this place?
Well, the place is Antarctica, the coldest, windiest, most inhospitable place on the planet. And just over 2 years ago, my best mate Jones and I found ourselves undertaking the longest unsupported polar expedition of all time. The plan was to ski from the coast of Antarctica to the South Pole and back, completely unsupported. So the food, the clothing, the tent, everything we need to survive for 3 months in Antarctica were in those 2 little yellow sleds behind us. When we start out from the coast, they're weighing about 160 kilos. So try and imagine filling a fridge at home full of beer, throwing it on its side and trying to pull that through the snow for 3 months. That was the weight of these sleds. And we knew we were in for by far the toughest expedition the two of us have ever undertaken. Now, if you rewind a few years before that, when we were getting ready to leave school, my best mate Jones and I were 2 pretty average kids at school. In fact, we weren't athletic at all. This was me just about to go off to my own Year 12 formal as I was leaving school, and I really feel quite sorry for my date there. But Jones and I were both carrying an extra 25 kilos to what we're carrying now, and we were pretty confused and happy blokes. We went through school doing what we were meant to do, both went to university, and I started studying a career, accounting, that I wasn't particularly engaged in. And on the weekends, we'd absolutely come alive. We'd go bushwalking, paddling, rock climbing, but always kept on bumbling through these occupations that we weren't happy with. And then the idea came up one day to paddle across one of the most violent stretches of ocean in the world, the Tasman Sea. And we'd done some smaller trips in the past, and got to this crossroad in my life where either I could go down life as an accountant, or I could commit myself to this objective that we did not know if it was possible. And that's when we threw everything we had at trying to unlock this puzzle and trying to figure out if it was possible to kayak 2,200 kilometers, so the distance from here to Moscow, in a little kayak. Seas were going to be up to 10 meters high, winds up to 100 kilometers an hour, and we ended up designing a kayak that was 27 feet long with a little cabin on the back end of it. The cabin was about the size of a coffin and a half stacked on top of each other, so just big enough to crawl into at night time, get out paddling the next day. November 2007, went up on the north coast of New South Wales in Australia and departed across the Tasman Sea. And initially we made some phenomenal progress. Each one of these yellow dots represents a 24-hour period at sea. And there's one day we actually paddled 178 kilometres in one 24-hour period. So the first half of the trip went great. And then as we approached the middle of the Tasman Sea, we got struck by this storm that the two of us will never forget. Seas were the height of this screen behind me. The waves would break, the kayak would get pulled through these enormous, monstrous waves. And it just continued on and on and on. It pushed us up further north, and then we found ourselves battling a 2-week current. We went round and round in circles for 2 weeks. We tried to fight against it, tried to get out, but we just could not make progress. The only way we could escape this current was to paddle 150 kilometres back towards Australia, loop down to the south and come round for another shot. And by thinking a little bit laterally and a little bit outside the box, the strategy worked, and Apollo 13 style, we slingshot our way out of it and continued on towards New Zealand. Barnacles popped up on the bottom of the hull, and they were slowing our progress, so we had to get them off, and we resolved the situation by playing scissor, paper, rock to figure out who's going to go and scrub these things off. Fortunately, Jonesy had to scrub them off. And what we realised, though, was by scrubbing these things off and the stench of his unwashed body created a burley trail up behind the kayak. And then when it came time to quit for the day, these two sharks popped up on the kayak and started grinding and rubbing themselves up against us. Their skin feels exactly like sandpaper. And I'll never forget going to sleep that night and having less than 1 centimetre of kayak hull between our head and that of these two sharks. It was the most bizarrely intimate night of my life. But fortunately, they left us in the morning and we continued on towards New Zealand. And after 62 days, we arrived at the shore and we were greeted with this incredible welcome. There were 25,000 people on this beach there to greet us in. Feeling that soft, silty sand of New Zealand come up between our toes was a day that two of us will never forget. And while this was all going on, I had this thought. The whole time on the Tasman Sea, that 4,000 kilometres to our right was this continent Antarctica that I remember dreaming about as a child. I wasn't interested in reading about Frodo Baggins or Harry Potter wiggling his little wand around. I wanted to read about explorers down in Antarctica. Just over 100 years ago, no one had ever stood at the bottom of the earth. And right up until then, no one had ever done the unsupported return journey to the South Pole and back. And we always knew that it was going to be right on the limit of human endurance. We didn't know if it was going to be possible, but we threw everything we had at trying to unlock this puzzle and trying to figure out a way to get there and back. In order to be successful, we were going to need to travel 500 kilometres than anyone had ever done in an unsupported manner in Antarctica. And that's what excited us, and we started throwing everything we had at making it happen. Don't have too much time to go into it today, but being a Greek Australian, hadn't really spent much time in the snow, so the two of us had to learn how to ski. Small little thing to get to know before you head to a place like Antarctica. Fortunately, things started to improve. We went through the planning phase, and then we flew across the Pacific to the tailbone of South America, a little place called Punta Arenas. And when we arrived there, we had a couple of weeks to pack our sleds and get ourselves ready. And in walked this 6'3" tall, blonde Norwegian guy, Alex Gammy. And he quite proudly announced to us that he was going to be the first person to walk from the coast of Antarctica to the South Pole and back unsupported. We were dumbfounded. This guy is a polar guide. He'd guided people across Greenland. He'd climbed Everest and two 8,000 metre peaks. And he was Jones and myself. We felt like the Jamaican bobsled team. We just learned how to ski. Now we were in a race with this Norwegian Terminator. And it was with that heavy cloud that we took our final plane flight to Antarctica, and that's where we were going to begin our journey. It was in the springtime, and the South Pole was sitting 1,100 kilometres away at an altitude of 2,800 metres. Now that's about the height of Mount Olympus. And when you're starting from the coast and you need to pull it up to that kind of altitude, you feel every single one of those metres. And the plan was to drop off 4 food caches that we hoped to pick up on the return journey. So we started out, and in the first month of the expedition, we got some horrendous weather. First, half a foot fell of snow, a foot and a half. It was quite atmospheric. We thought, oh, this is great, this is beautiful. But when you're dragging a sled that weighs 160 kilos through a foot and a half of freshly fallen snow, it's not something I wish upon my worst enemy. It feels like your gizzards are being pushed up against your back. You're leaning so far forward in your sled that your face is about to kiss the ground. We were averaging less than 10 kilometres a day for that first 30 days. We had to average 25 kilometres a day to make this trip happen. And the only thing we could control was ourselves, so we started pushing harder and harder every single day. Mileage crept up, but by pushing so hard, our body started to break. And this infection spread across my body. And we were staring down the barrel of failure. I couldn't move, I couldn't sleep. I was in so much pain that I just thought the whole expedition was over. We sat there for 2 days knowing Alex Gammy was making his way towards the South Pole. And then we started a course of antibiotics, and that started to help clear up the infection. And then when we got back on the trail for the second time, we realised that on a 3-month expedition in a place like Antarctica, you can't force your agenda on the place. You need to work with it. So we wound back down to 80%, and we kept progressing forward. And sure enough, as summer came and temperatures improved, it was time to celebrate one of the most glorious days of the year, Christmas. A few years earlier on the Tasman Sea, we hadn't bought Christmas presents for one another because we didn't think we were going to do that whole donut in the middle thing. This time though, we came prepared and we came ready for the whitest Christmas of our lives, and it really was a day the two of us will never forget. Here it is right now.
So it's Christmas Day. Josie's just outside doing the snow flaps, and I brought a few decorations. I've made Josie a little card.
What's that? I'm whispering to myself. Nah, mate. What do you mean, what am I doing in there?
This is his Christmas present. For the last 2 weeks, I've been saving bacon for him. He's gonna be so excited. Here he comes.
Merry Christmas, bro! Merry Christmas, boys! You're kidding me! You're kidding me! You're kidding me! Where did this come from? Where did this come from? For the last 2 weeks, I haven't been eating my meat.
You kidding me?
Every day, I've been picking aside and it's been for Jonesy.
You kidding me?
2 weeks of meat, that is.
I can't do that. I can't do that. That's not right. Oh, my present says like shit now. Merry Christmas from Antarctica! Woo! That's a dog!
It was the third expedition Christmas the two of us have spent together, and it was by far the best. Our progress was up, and then we started skiing off towards the South Pole, knowing that in 5 days' time, we were going to reach the bottom of the earth and stand where all our great heroes had stood. So we made our progress, and then on day 62, as we're skiing in, we saw this pole. It's a barbershop pole with this round globe on it. And it literally is the South Pole. And all these flags lying around it. And the two of us were so excited. We skied up to this thing and we started doing donuts around it, thinking, beat that Robert Knox Johnson. We got there far, it took us not very long to go around the world. And we were having so much fun. And this scientist that you can see reflected in the globe there actually came out and broke some news to us. He said, guys, you are doing so well. And you're only 5 days behind Alexander Gammy. 5 days? Look, that doesn't matter. What we're going to do is we're going to catch him on the return, because every single step we take away from the South Pole is taking us one step closer to our goal and not away from it. And it was at this moment, the moment that we stepped into uncharted waters by turning our backs on the South Pole, that the real adventure had just begun. It had taken us 62 days to reach the South Pole. We now only had 27 days to ski that same distance all the way back to the coast. To get back in 27 days, we had to average over a marathon every single day. The biggest day we'd done on the outward journey had been 34 kilometres. So we now had to average 10 kilometres more than our biggest day every single day, or we were going to miss the final plane of the season. And at this point, we didn't know if it was possible. We didn't know if it was humanly possible, if it was possible for ourselves. Our bodies were so wasted away by this point. But we were going to give it everything we had, and we started skiing the biggest days of our lives. 40 kilometres, 45k, even started nudging close to 50 kilometres every single day. And the mileage started to come. It started to melt behind us. We left the polar plateau. We found ourselves skiing along. But when you've been pushing yourself that hard for that long in a place like Antarctica, our bodies literally start to die on us. Our hands and our feet were the first things to go. We lost complete dexterity in the lower 2/3 of our fingers. Our feet became a mess. This infection spread across our face that made even eating a chore. You'd open up your mouth to shovel in some of your half provisions, and it'd crack and bleed, and then all you could taste for the rest of the meal was blood. The two of us lost 55 kilos of weight Jonesy lost 30, I lost 25. And we did not know, we'd wake up in the morning and trying to walk around outside the tent was difficult. But we always felt that we could keep taking one more step. And when you keep taking one more step, sure enough, the end goal starts getting closer and closer. And on the return journey, as we kept on skiing away with our bodies looking like that, by day 87, we realised that we were going to get back to the coast, but we hadn't caught Alexander Gammy. He'd beaten us to our goal. And we thought, look, that doesn't matter. We've put everything into this thing. And being the second people to have achieved such a journey is a pretty phenomenal achievement in itself. And on the last day of the expedition, on day 89, we packed up our tent for the final time and we started skiing back towards our start point. And we're aiming for this little rock on the horizon, this little black dot. And we were skiing down Hercules Inlet, and because we'd lost all these stabilising muscles in our bodies, we'd fall over and we'd pick ourselves back up and just continue on. And as that black dot started to get closer, we realised that it was actually moving, and it was coming towards us. And it wasn't a black dot at all. It was actually a 6'3" tall, blonde Norwegian guy waiting 3 kilometres short of the finish line so that we could all finish this expedition together. Alex showed us that a much higher level of self-fulfillment and achievement can be reached when you're not fighting people, when you're working together with one another. Yeah, we fed off each other's energy out there, and we both don't feel that we would have been able to pull off this journey if the other person wasn't out there pushing themselves as hard as he was. And so we sat there, and then finally the plane came down to us, picked us up, and it was time to come home. I came back to a beautiful fiancée who I married a couple of weeks after I got back, and of course, Jonesy was my best man at the wedding. Here's our arrival back now.
The greatest adventure stories.
The 2 Australian adventurers trekking across Antarctica.
On a record-breaking trek.
Returning from an epic Antarctic expedition.
They survived more than their fair share of dangers and eventually walked into the history books.
Building bridges in your mind. Your eagerness now is on the line. The plastic mountain at your feet. Divided streets now as you look to find a seat. And every wolf is at your door, just like 100 times before. But you don't wanna see the end.
Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you.